everyone, welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today is Tuesday, August 15th, 2023. It is the Feast of the Assumption today, a holy day of obligation, as we noted in yesterday's show. If you haven't been to Mass yet, you don't have much time. I'm Simon Rafe, here with my two co-hosts, Kyle Copey and Rodney Pelletier. Good to have you with us, guys. Earlier this month, a celebrity spoke in glowing terms about her experience using surrogacy. Riley Keough, a granddaughter of Elvis Presley, told Vanity Fair in a recent interview, quote, "I think it's a very cool, selfless, and incredible act that these women do to help other people. I can carry children, but it felt like the best choice for what I had going on physically with the autoimmune stuff." It appears that she's referencing having Lyme disease. Although it's not an autoimmune disorder per se, it is often linked with autoimmune problems, which she talked about elsewhere in the interview. Back to the surrogacy question, there are many reasons why Catholics should object to surrogacy like this. There's the fact that it treats children like a commodity to be bought and sold. The fact that it treats a woman's womb as a piece of property to be rented and used. The list could go on. All right, so guys, what do we think about this? I mean, I think initially, firstly, that you've got this lady, Riley, who is saying that she's got, Lyme disease, which is a very nasty disease and it can have a very long-term effect and so forth. So she's making the decision in many ways to say, well, she doesn't want to have children herself, doesn't want to have children because, she may get sick. And to be honest, that is a decision that I respect. I mean, if somebody were to say, I don't want to be a mother because of the physical and the medical impacts on that, I think that is a decision that we can respect. I mean, people say, I don't want to be a parent. Obviously, it's a decision we can respect. But certainly, there are certain things you don't get to do if you say you don't want to be a parent. And equally, and one of them particularly as much, you really shouldn't go out and use surrogacy to do that.
No, you should not at all. I don't know this woman's intentions. I'm not really too familiar with her, although, she is, I guess, famous for being famous in a certain sense, because you're the granddaughter of Elvis Presley, but I think she does have pretty accomplished as, she's only 34 years old, but she has accomplished, as an actress, a career so far, so, all well and good with that. But I think with a lot of these people, a lot of these women, it's a narcissism thing. And I'm not imputing those intentions to her, although this very well may be the case. But it's like, well, I'm going to use a surrogate because, as we all know, childbearing, birthing is really hard on your body. The weight gain and everything that goes along with that. And as an actress, you got to keep your body in really good shape. So how about I just have someone else carry my kid for me, and then I get to enjoy the fruits of that later?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, look, this Riley Keough, Elvis Presley's daughter, I presume Lisa Marie Presley's? I don't know. I
Maybe.
Guess. Yeah. I'm not sure.
Pop culture.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know much about the Presley family at all. I know.
Apparently he's still alive.
Apparently he is still alive. Yeah, that was always the joke, wasn't it?
Elvis hanging out with somebody else.
Yes, or you saw him at the grocery store or something. But really, this isn't about this particular lady, her decision. That's just sort of the jumping off point to discuss this wider issue of surrogacy, which is what's happening here. Is this just seems to be yet another example of secular culture drifting further and further from the fundamental normalness of parenthood, of family. It's like, okay, so, you've got a man and a woman and they like each other and they go off and they get married and they live together and they have children and they grow old together and those children are raised and those children become and we're all very familiar with that, because at the very least we've seen it. I mean, obviously, I think probably a lot of our audience have experienced it, that we've experienced that kind of life of being raised in a family, and it just seems that is normal, but it is no longer the norm, it seems.
Yeah, it's getting weirder and weirder. I mean, we're seeing every day, pretty much, news stories lauding these gay couples, adopting babies, and sometimes these babies are gotten through surrogacy. I don't like to say that they're adopted. I say they're trafficked, child trafficking, because, children deserve a mother and a father. But we're seeing this is normalized. A Fox normalizes it, and conservative Fox News. It's becoming the new, Marxist modernist doctrine that everybody's supposed to be okay with. And that just shows just how our society's fallen. That is becoming the new norm. where these types of things are okay. And surrogacy, I mean, you got to think about the process of how these people are brought into being is kind of horrific. It's out of it's sci-fi movie stuff. I mean, we're living the dystopian sci-fi future right now. We're there, you know. In an alternative reality, people will be like, oh, what if it was this and that? Here we are. This is us
with that thing. I think it probably is actually worth discussing, maybe because the audience don't necessarily understand, you know, what is meant by surrogacy. It's kind of like, we've become used to the word abortion. We all know what abortion means. Abortion means that you are killing a baby in the womb, but you have to remember that abortion itself is a euphemism for what's happening. You know, and so when we talk about surrogacy, we're not talking about the notion of somebody saying, well, I'm going to commit to adopt your child once the child is born. So in many cases, somebody will become pregnant, and then for whatever reason, they will decide that she can't keep the baby, but she says, well, I'll put the baby up for adoption. And rather than wait until the baby is born, the actual process of like, okay, we will adopt the child like as soon as it is born. We'll make the arrangements. Now, that's not what we're talking about here with surrogacy. With surrogacy, what we're talking about is where the egg from the biological mother and the sperm from the biological father are fused together, and they're fused together in vitro, which for those of you with a classical education, you will know means in glass. So it is done in a test tube or in a petri dish. That's why it's called in vitro.
Test tube
baby, exactly as was the phrase back, what was that, the 80s back in then, wasn't it? Yeah. So you then have a baby. You have a fertilized egg. You have a baby who is a unique human creation, and that baby is taken and implanted in the womb of another woman who acts as the surrogate. She is essentially, to put a very brutal kind of thing on it, she is rent-a-womb. And of course the child is implanted. The child, implants within the uterine wall, and the child grows. The child is fed by the surrogate there, and the child is born the normal way. And of course, then the child is taken and is given to the biological parents. So obviously, this is the technology involved, and there's a whole bunch of kind of concerns with like almost every step of that, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, there's just the first step, the how do you get the sperm from the father? And it's not even the father sometimes. Sometimes it's a sperm donor, or what I would call a sperm vendor, because they don't donate the sperm, they sell the sperm. So there's always this transaction thing there. No one's just giving that stuff away, right? So how do they get the sperm from the father? Well, it requires him to do something called masturbation, which, you know, any good Catholic knows is a mortal sin. Now, there are other ways to extract the sperm, so people are going to, you know, put those out there and say, well, look, you don't have to do that. Look, those are weird and few and far between. Yes. Most of it is done by masturbation.
We discussed this before the show, and there are a number of ways. Obviously, the way that I don't know the numbers, but it's the overwhelming majority is done through masturbation, which obviously, as you said, is objectively a mortal sin. But the other one actually involves the use of a needle and your private parts, which I got to say, at that point, it's like, okay, not many people are going to be volunteering for that one, and they're going to be choosing the completely illicit method.
No, not many. But even if that's the case, even if sperm is extracted in that way and there's no masturbation, it still doesn't make it okay, because there's like 2 or 3 more mortal sins that you could commit that necessarily have to be committed to achieve a surrogate pregnancy. You think of the extraction of the ovum, the woman's egg. That in and of itself, the extraction is not necessarily morally illicit, but when that gets fertilized by whose ever sperm in whatever petri dish, it's not usually one egg. It used to be that way, but nowadays they're using multiple eggs to see which one will be more viable. They're going to pick the most viable one and implant that into the woman's womb. What happens to the rest of the eggs? Well, they get frozen, they get experimented upon, and many of them get disposed. So again, multiple abortions are happening leading up to surrogacy, to surrogate motherhood.
Yeah, and I think as well, we also need to discuss that obviously we can very clearly see the idea that masturbation is sinful, that this aborting, killing of children, or consigning these children to some sort of icy purgatory, obviously that is wrong. But also the church teaches as well that the act of conception should be connected to an act of procreation. It should be connected to the act of a husband and a wife coming together, not merely being done in some a lab or something like this. Even if there was not a sense of a sin attached to that, what it does is it divorces the unitive and the procreative method, the aspects of sex. We're always talking about how contraception divorces these two things. It divorces the unitive and the procreative aspects of sex. Well, this one is actually divorcing them just in a different way. It's not divorcing them by making one not happen. It's just completely disconnecting them utterly there. And so, yeah, and it's very, very distressing.
Yeah, the unitive and the procreative element have to happen in the same context. It can't happen 3 days later. So the couple that says, well, I'm using my sperm and my wife's egg, and, we might even be, using a perforated condom or something, and that's how we're getting my sperm, and then the doctors are putting it together later. So they would argue, oh, we're having this unitive element because we actually had sex, and then a few days later, the petri dish zygote gets implanted into my wife. Wouldn't that be still, fulfilling these two elements of unitive and procreative? No, because it has to happen within the same act, in the same context.
Yeah, and there's with the idea that this is just all-out war on the family. It's a continuation of the war on the family, which we know through Fatima. That's going to be the final battle of our times. And you have attack on masculinity, attacks on femininity, attacks on childhood innocence that we see everywhere, every day. And these are attacks on how people come to be created, and that's all of these are affronts to the Creator, like you said, and what the church teaches is that there's unity and what is it?
Unitive and procreative.
And coherence and emphasis. No, that's something else. But right, and that's important. Husband and wife procreate, they create with God. They give the genetic material, and when conditions are right and the sperm and the egg come together and form, the soul is implanted by God. A unique human being who has never existed in the history of the world and who will never exist again. A unique, beautiful, wonderful human being is created there. And you lose that mystery, that beauty of it. And you mentioned that, they have various fertilized, embryos there and they look for the ones that are more viable. And so at this point, I don't know, imagine being able to choose your children. Knowing, okay, I could have 100 possible children. You kind of, who all of them are. Okay, you got to pick one. Yeah. You can't do that as a parent, because parents, we love our children so completely that, to pick, say, okay, you're going to be this one and not all these other ones. It's a horrific choice that, it's not our pay grade to choose that. That's the idea that conception, I believe it can happen even a few days later, but that's something that only God sees. So even the parents have a part of it, but the actual conception itself is hidden and darkened even from the parents. So there's a mystery there that I think God never wanted us to penetrate that mystery. That's left to Him alone. Parents do their job. God is doing His job. He knows when, where, all that stuff. And the whole idea of IVF, surrogacy, carrying somebody else's child like that. Adoption is one thing, but yeah, this is sci-fi freak show stuff where you're carrying somebody else's baby. Yeah. It's not your genetic material. And I wonder, because carrying a child, you have your DNA, the mother and the baby through the placenta exchange DNA, they have blood types. It's all exceptionally complicated. And it's almost like magic the way it is. It's so beautiful and amazing, but you need all of these things to fit together just right. And so what happens when you have the genetics of a man and a woman coming together and that make that child, and then that child is put in a completely different person? See, we don't know. This is still new. We don't know what issues could come of that.
No, potentially, and I think that you can say though that you will know what certain issues will come of it, because you can see them. It's been the plot in at least a couple of episodes of Law and Order SVU, which has dealt with surrogacy, and they do with all such kind of subjects. It's the first 10 seasons are very, very good. When Elliot Stable left, went downhill. Season 2 to 10, absolutely fantastic. But they deal with a lot of very important and issues in there, and some of them have involved surrogacy and this sort of thing. And one of the psychological impacts that happens is women who are surrogates not wanting to give the baby up and being forced by the courts to give the baby up because they signed an agreement, or they flee and they skip to Canada, or whatever is required to be resolved in a 45-minute TV series. But all of these things of the psychological impact of this, that what you are doing is you are essentially saying to a woman, hi, I want to rent your body. Yeah. Now, okay, I don't want to rent your body for 90 minutes, I want to rent your body for 9 months, but ultimately it's still a form of prostitution. That's essentially what it is. It's coming on, and that is not a nice thing to happen to a person, to say, I'm going to rent your body and I have rights over it because I've paid. And I don't know, are the women making these decisions to be surrogates, are these women who have other options, or are these women who have been forced into these kind of things? As we see, just mentioned prostitution, infamously sex workers do not get into sex work because it is empowering and wonderful, etc., etc. They get into it because they are forced to do so because they have no other choice. Well, surrogacy, there are certainly going to be some women who are placed in this position where they have to do this. Perhaps not with regard to this Riley Keough, who obviously is dealing at a very high level, very expensive, lots of money in this sort of stuff. But certainly, yeah, you wonder about this. I mean, are you coming along and you get paid your few $1,000s or whatever it is to do this, and are they getting psychological help at the end of it? What is happening to these women when they have to go through the difficulty, the suffering of bearing a child, the difficulty of childbirth, and then go, oh, and there's the baby.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the couple is going to be right there, as in the baby is going to come out, you're going to take it, you're going to snip the cord, you're going to hang it upside down, you're going to smack it on. I've never actually been in the delivery room. I assume that's what they do. And then bring the 1950s back. But that baby is going to be immediately handed over to the parents. Yeah. I'm sure we saw this with somebody. It was a gay couple, and they had surrogacy, and they'd had rent a womb or what have you, and they'd done something like this. And of course, it was just like, yeah, this is our baby, and take our baby straight. And it's like, that woman just carried the child for 9 months. Yeah. And where is the compassion for what that? No, I paid, and almighty dollar will talk.
Yeah. Another aspect of this whole thing that is often not thought of is the children who are conceived through this, who happen to survive the selection process, who survive being implanted, they're born. Then what? So there's a great organization. We did an interview with the founder of Them Before Us. Her name is Katie Faust. We did that on Mic'd Up several years ago. Look it up. It's good stuff. But she herself is I think her mother was a lesbian, so she was brought up without a father in the home. So her organization helps to promote the rights of children before adult desires. So adults, before you do things or marry or get divorced or get IVF or whatever, think about the children, how this impacts them, because they have rights. And there's beautiful testimonies on that, well, sad testimonies of people from all sorts of situations. I want to read just snippets of one from a woman who was conceived through IVF. And she has these issues that bother her now as an adult. She said, why did the knowledge that I was conceived by IVF after 8 rounds make me feel so much like a lab rat? Why did it tarnish the feeling of being a miracle? Because she was told, you're a miracle baby. It wasn't until she was older she found out they got her through IVF. I spent my entire life wanting siblings. My dad always told me I didn't have siblings because once I was born, he was too too enthralled with me to think of having more. My mom occasionally commented they couldn't afford trying again. So this is very expensive also. So, and now I knew I had siblings, a lot of siblings, probably 2 or 3 embryos per round, 9 rounds. Total is a lot of babies. Why me? Why had I survived when none of them did? What would my life have been like if even just 1 or 2 of them have lived? Were there any more of us in a freezer somewhere? All of these, it's like a survivor's guilt, you know? Somehow, somewhere, my parents developed the idea they deserved to have a baby, and it didn't matter how much it cost, how many times it took, or how many died in the process. They deserved a child, and with an attitude like that, by the time I was born, they thought they deserved to have the perfect child, as Dad defined a perfect child. And since they deserved a child, I was their property to be controlled, not a person or a gift to be treasured. So this is just one statement. Go to their website, Them Before Us. You'll see all sorts of accounts like this. The tragedy, the sadness that these people have, you know, some of them find out, oh, okay, whatever, IVF conceived and the life continues. But there are people whose whole lives are thrown into chaos, finding out that they weren't brought into existence through love, but through scientific processes and money and all this other stuff. And that's not natural, and they know it, and it hurts so bad. You know, rent a womb, you know, buy a baby. This whole idea of just turning children into a commodity. You know, with pedophilia becoming more rampant and accepted among the left, and, you know, trans kids and all this other stuff, children a commodity. We see how in these modern times, we're in these evil times, that the innocent who should be protected and cherished and seen as a gift of God are just denigrated at every chance. Their innocence is destroyed. The way they're brought into the world is destroyed, you know, from the natural matter, and this is where we are as a society.
Yeah, and it's not just bad because, you know, these people are coming into being through scientific means. You know, science is sort of a neutral thing. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. What this really is a misuse of modern science. Because if I may, I would quote the great Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park when he's talking to the founder of Jurassic Park, John Hammond, and he's saying that, look, you guys are out of control here with what you're doing, bringing dinosaurs back to life and mixing them up with the humans. He says that your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could do something, they didn't stop to think whether or not they should. And we should not do this here. I mean, look, we talked about the denigration of the culture. This is where this comes from, because we've lost our sense of morality. If you were to, you know, if I was to look at my great-grandparents were to come back to life and see the stuff that was going on today in terms of all the immorality when it comes to science, this is why we have something like bioethics. My great-grandparents would be scandalized at some of this stuff. Surrogacy, contraception, porn on demand, people cohabitating together, the smut that passes for the entertainment industry,
adoption,
all that stuff. And it's, I mean, look, it's like the 1970s were the key here. What happens in the 1970s? You're coming off of the heels of the sexual revolution, still going on arguably through the 1970s and the 1980s. You have Roe v. Wade in 73, and then in the latter part, I think it was 78, is when they first had the successful IVF baby is born. Born on the exact day, 10 years prior to that day, in 1968, Paul VI issued Humanae Vitae. Wow, little bit of a coincidence
so just
there.
One day, one decade.
One decade to the day later, the first person is born. I mean, this whole idea, we talked about this before. You don't have a right to a child, and it's a terrible thing. When a good Catholic couple gets together, and I know several couples who are infertile for whatever reason, it's a terrible thing. But there's a basic moral principle, as you know, you have a desire to have a child, and that's good and natural. It's a God-given desire, but you don't have a right to that child, unfortunately. And for you to employ evil means to achieve a good end, that's morality 101. You just can't do that. Doesn't matter how good your goal is, you can't participate in stuff like this.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I'm half of one of the couples that you know who can't have children. My wife and I can't have children. There's a thing that gets asked a lot of kind of childless Catholic couples, because of course Catholic couples in general are going around and saying, don't be aborting children, don't be using surrogacy, don't be using IVF, etc., etc., etc. It's like, oh well, if you're so concerned about these children, why don't you adopt? Why don't you adopt? You need to adopt all the children and then we'll talk. And it's like, no, I don't. Okay, so first off,
the short answer is it's none of your business.
It's none of your business.
Next question.
Well, okay, yeah. But here's kind of the truth. I sit up here, I throw on a suit, and I make jokes, and so it does become people's business.
Yeah.
So what it is that you look at it and you say, firstly, again, abortion, somewhat euphemistic. It's like, stop murdering children. That's it. Oh, if you're so against the murdering of children, you should stop. Whoa. I want you to stop murdering children. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that I necessarily have to campaign for 3 square meals a day for children. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean I have to campaign they're not allowed to go down the mines. It doesn't mean that I should find a different way to get my chimney cleaned. Okay, all of those things, absolutely yes. Those are abusive and we should address those things and fine. But ultimately, me saying don't kill children, that stands alone as a moral principle. Yeah. Thou shalt not kill. Stop murdering. Don't kill kids. I don't need to go, because in order to buy your cooperation with, checks notes, not slaughtering children, Moloch, I need to adopt all these children. Yeah. The other one is, and this is like an interesting one, which does become very personal, obviously may be very, very different out there for other couples, and obviously there's many couples who've adopted children, and I fully support them. I think that's absolutely wonderful. I know several. But my wife and I didn't want children. We wanted our children. I wanted children made out of bits of her. That's what I wanted. I married her, and I wanted to have children with her that were biologically made. Now, I understand there's going to be a lot of adopted children out there, and adoptive parents who are going to be like, you know what, my children, they are my real children. 100%. I'm not saying it's not real. I'm saying it's not biological, and you know what? Blood means something. Mm-hmm. And maybe it doesn't to you, but it can, and it can be a legitimate thing. And so obviously you could say it's none of my business, none of your business, but I would kind of want to explain it. There, and I just want to say I'm not getting emotional. I just have a really bad sore throat.
Well, also too, you didn't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars to adopt a child.
I did.
Adoption is not free, people. It's unfortunate that the adoption industry is an industry now. Mm-hmm. You hear big pharma, big tech, big whatever. There's big adoption too. There's people making boatloads of money off of this stuff. Unfortunately, gone are the days where you could just adopt for very little.
Yeah. It's been made very, very difficult, very complicated. And again, that's another thing. When you come along and you're talking about surrogacy, which is tremendously expensive, because you know what? It's bleeding edge science. It absolutely is. It's this bleeding edge science. It's incredibly complicated. It requires incredible amounts of technology and all of this involvement and all this expense. And you're messing around with things it's best not to mess around with. So the liability insurance itself is thousands and thousands of dollars. And then adoption is tremendously expensive. All of these things are tremendously expensive. So what it is essentially, it's saying, the rich, the very, very rich get to have these things, whereas those people, not even just like, you don't get it if you're poor, you don't get it if you're a normal person. So ultimately this is where it comes down to. You come down and say, we have an abnormal method of getting children that the abnormal, the hyper rich use. So there we go. I mean, I'm going to start railing against capitalism, which is probably not going to play well with our audience, is it? No. Capitalism's fine. It's just not perfect. It's not the be all and end all. Read the Pope's encyclicals on this one. That's a download, isn't it? Oh, that's what we should do. All right. Anyway, thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now, please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. Ad te clamamus exules filii Eve. Ad te suspiramus gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos, ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you again for joining us for the download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, even on holy days of obligation, which is today. If you have not been to Mass, you are now advised. That makes you culpable. Go. Anyway, from all of us here at Church Militant, may God bless you.